The Devils need more scoring. And I think that's a point of emphasis for Tom Fitzgerald during the course of the offseason. But where do the Devils turn to? Well, let's look to Minnesota because there might be some trouble between Marco Rossi and the front office. Should the Devils take advantage of that opportunity? We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here at the Locked On Network. I'm your host, College Hockey Play announcer, Devils Wire Pucks Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Let's go back in time. With the 7th overall pick in the 2020 NHL Draft, the New Jersey Devils are proud to select Alexander Holtz from Sweden. All right, a couple draft picks later, with the 9th overall pick in the 2020 NHL Draft, the Minnesota Wild are proud to select Marco Rossi from Austria. All right, let's fast forward to the present day. Holtz no longer a part of the Devils organization. He is currently playing for the Golden Knights in Sin City. He was a part of the Paul Cotter trade alongside Akira Schmid. Holtz is bouncing up and down the NHL and the AHL. Great offensive player. Unfortunately, too one-dimensional. Sometimes it was easy for then head coach Lindy Ruff to bench him to the point where Ruff would just lay into some reporters and say, you don't watch the game very well when it comes to Holtz and his playing time. We know how that saga panned out. Cotter is now a part of the Devils. I think everyone loves him, a physical player. As for the Wild, there might be some trouble up there because it seems like Rossi and the front office are in a disagreement when it comes to Rossi's future with the organization. Rumors are circulating that the Wild are looking to trade the pending RFA because I don't think they see Rossi as an important piece to their future. Should the Devils pounce on the opportunity? In the first segment, we will look back at Rossi's 2024-2025 season, and then I will answer the question, should the Devils legitimately try to pursue him? Then in the second segment, I will read you snippets of Neil Villapiano's recent article for Pucks and Pitchforks. He talked about possible trade scenarios to get Rossi. Obviously, the Devils only have about $12 million in cap space. You got to factor in Luke Hughes' contract. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. The Devils are going to have to get somewhat unique. And then in the third and final segment, everybody has a unique point of view when it comes to how the Devils should approach this offseason. I see some people who are for Rossi. I see some people who are against Rossi because he stands 5'9". Some people are looking for more physicality. I think the Panthers are a good example. At this point, I got to shoot Armando of Locked On Panthers a message and ask him if he wants a co-host because I talk about the Panthers so often on my platform. But all jokes aside, the Panthers are certainly the blueprint that I think a lot of teams are trying to mimic. It's a copycat league, and the Devils certainly need to follow the blueprint that they laid out. But we'll talk about that in the third and final segment. What should the Devils focus on, scoring or physicality? I'll answer the question. All right. Are the Wild actually going to trade Rossi? Well, courtesy of an article I found over at hockeywilderness.com, here's what's going on. It's not new that the Wild might trade the 23-year-old center Marco Rossi this summer. The team clearly does not value him as a top 6 center, so before locking him up to any contract as a restricted free agent, they're looking to trade him for some sort of player that aligns more with their philosophy for their roster construction. But what's new is some specific teams being reportedly interested. Among them are the Penguins, Flyers. I will circle back to the Flyers a little later in the episode. Sabres, Blackhawks, and Kraken. Basically, I think the answer is yes. The Wild are going to see what they could possibly get for Rossi because I guess they don't value him as a top 6 option moving forward. I would say Rossi had a pretty good year with the Wild. He appeared in 82 games. He had 24 goals, which ranked third on the team, 36 assists, second on the team, 60 points, second, 7 power play goals, first, 16 power play points. He won 464 faceoffs, second, which gave him a faceoff win percentage of 46.8%, seventh. He had 62 hits, ninth on the team, a 4.3 offensive point share rating, third, 1.9 defensive point share rating, eighth, giving him a point share rating of 6.3, third. He had an expected goals for rating of 57.3, third. Shout out to former Devils head coach John Hines. Obviously, he's still behind the bench in Minnesota, and I think he's getting the most out of Rossi. But what does Rossi bring to the table in general? Well, the former 9th overall pick in the 2020 draft is small but a supremely skilled forward who has superb anticipation, excellent hockey sense, and IQ. He is an outstanding playmaker who can create offense in the tough areas and is also showing he can handle the defensive responsibilities that go along with being a center. Doesn't have a real burst of speed, but he is quick and agile with a strong lower base that lets him win puck battles. So that's basically all you need to know about Rossi and his overall game. Should the Devils pursue him? My answer is, if the price is right, I think the Devils should try to see what they could potentially do to get Rossi added to the roster, because one of the main issues that the Devils had was their depth, because during the course of the playoffs, their bottom 6 only produced 3 points. That's not going to get it done. I get it. The Devils were dealing with a decent amount of injuries, but it wasn't just in the playoffs. It was in the regular season as well. Outside of the core assets, who else was going to score regularly without going into a scoring drought? I talked about it in the previous episode with Eric Haula, who is also a former Wild player. Haula got off to a really good start. He also finished the season strong, but in the middle, next to nothing. He didn't really produce all that much. Paul Cotter, he also went on a lengthy scoring drought. He brought physicality. He broke the single season hits record for the Devils. Unfortunately, similar to Haula, Cotter got off to a really good start, and I would say his finish was also respectable, but in the middle, especially during that December and January period, you didn't really see Cotter's name in the score sheet all that often when it came to points. Justin Dowling, career AHL player. Tomas Tatar, I think it's safe to say that if he were to explore the open market, no team was really going to bite all that much for him. That's why he signed a 2-year deal to play in Switzerland. The point I'm just trying to make is that the Devils need another scoring option outside of Hischier, Hughes, Bratt, and Meyer. Let's go back a couple seasons. You saw great goal scoring production from players like Hamilton, Tatar, Mercer, Haula. That's what made the Devils dangerous. Or go back to last season, adding Toffoli to the mix. The Devils were dangerous when it came to offense. As for Rossi and his current situation, if the price is right and the Devils are able to get somewhat unique and try to come to a deal, maybe they should consider Rossi. Now, we'll talk more about how the Devils approach this, but before we continue, let me tell you guys about FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. All right, the Thunder have already punched their ticket to the NBA Finals. We still don't know what's going to happen between the Knicks and the Pacers, but I think the Pacers are also going to be heading to the NBA Finals. I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he's going to assert himself against the Pacers. I think it's going to be rather difficult for either the Pacers or the Knicks to beat the Thunder 4 times out of 7. So if I had to lean towards my favorite, I'm going to pick OKC. New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay. In the previous segment, I talked about how I think the Devils should pursue Rossi. But the problem is, what would that package look like? And the bigger question is, what would his new contract look like? Because the Devils don't really have much money to play with. Anthony DeMarco shared on X and said, I don't think there is a fit with Philadelphia at this time. Remember, Philadelphia is one of the teams interested in Rossi. Speaking with sources, the Wild would want Tyson Foerster or one of Philadelphia's late first-round picks. Philadelphia has no interest in either. Rossi's contract demands are said to be, quote-unquote, too much for either team. My colleague over at Pucks and Pitchforks, Alex Chavancy, added and said, a late first equivalent for Rossi. Devils got to be all over that. If you're curious, Forster this season appeared in 81 games, had 25 goals, 18 assists for a grand total of 43 points. So I think it's safe to say that he's somewhat productive, but obviously I kind of see more potential in Rossi. Forster is 23 years of age. We'll see where his career goes. But basically, I think that's the base as to what the Wild are looking for. I guess they're looking for a player that's not going to demand a hefty salary compared to Rossi. One of my other colleagues over at Pucks and Pitchforks, Neil Villapiano, also wrote a great article talking about the Rossi situation. Here's what Neil had to say. When it comes to how New Jersey can acquire him, there are a few ways. The first is that they can offer him as an RFA. A bridge deal would be too easy for the Wild to match. However, offering him a long-term contract would make it much more likely for him to sign. According to AFP Analytics, Rossi is projected to get a 7-year deal at $7.4 million average annual value in a long-term circumstance. I would doubt that if the Devils can get the cap space and offer him that deal, that the Wild would match it. If that's the case, the Devils would have to give up a first-round pick and a third-round pick in 2026. Neil also added and said that it's worth doing that. He also said the other option is to trade for him in either a sign and trade or just acquire his rights and then negotiate with Rossi and his team. A sign and trade would force the Devils to give up more than just acquiring his signing rights. It's tough to know exactly what the Devils would have to give up or what the Wild would want, given that there hasn't been a player like Rossi as an RFA available like this. When looking at options, the better route for Fitzgerald and the Devils is to offer sheet Rossi, sign him, and give up just picks. Opening up salary cap space is something the Devils are doing regardless, and there's a possibility that the Devils could have enough to acquire the young centerman. Like I said, if the price is right, I'm willing to go all in for Rossi because I think that is an interesting player available on the market that could help the Devils in more ways than one. But the problem is, what do the Devils do in order to free up some of that cap space? Well, another one of my colleagues over at Pucks and Pitchforks, Joseph Stanislaw, aka Jersey Joe, and I had a conversation of the matter. And basically, Joe said that maybe the Devils could offer Luke Hughes a deferred contract. So there you go. That gives the Devils some more flexibility. Or we look at some players that are signed to long-term deals. You look at Andre Palat. You look at Dougie Hamilton. If I had to pick one or the other, I would say Andre Palat's seat might be feeling a little warm, but given the clauses attached to his contract, it's easier said than done. But players like Dawson Mercer, Eric Holla. I think that can also give the Devils some wiggle room. I don't think it's likely, and obviously the Devils aren't being reported as one of the teams interested in Rossi, but it's just an interesting suggestion. So I think the Devils, when it comes to salary cap, similar to what Neil said, they are going to have to clear it in more ways than one. But at the same time, I want the Devils to be smart how they approach the offseason, and I want them to be frugal when it comes to their finances, because we'll talk more about this in the third segment. One player isn't going to save the Devils. It's going to have to be a collective team effort. It's a multi-step process. And even then, I think the Devils are certainly a playoff team. The Metro is weak. I'm not really concerned about the Metro. There's a reason why the Devils never dropped out of the top three despite their struggles in the second half. Digressing a little bit, the Devils are a playoff team, but I think a lot of people, including me, want to see them become legitimate title contenders, and they still got some work to do. But adding Rossi does add some more offense to the roster. While the Devils' defense and goaltending improved, their offense took a few steps back, a little too much for my liking. So they got to address that a little bit more. Okay, a lot of people have their various opinions as to what do the Devils need, because I saw some people say they don't want Rossi because he stands 5'9", and basically people don't want the Devils centers to be Nico Hischier, Jack Hughes, and Marco Rossi, because no one's going to really fear that in terms of physicality. And you're right, because Jack's not going to fight anyone. Nico's not going to fight anyone. Marco's not going to fight anyone. When you think of those players, obviously highly skilled players, but they're not really going to like stick up for themselves, if you know what I mean. They're not going to drop the mitts. They're not going to get into a fight. They're not going to rough up some other players. They're going to rely on their teammates to help them out. And we saw that when Matthew Tkachuk tried going after Nico multiple times. But I digress a little bit. Let's answer the question. What do the Devils need? Should they focus more on scoring or physicality? Pick one or the other. I think the Devils need to focus on scoring a little bit more, because I don't think they're as soft as a team as people are making them out to be. Because let's look at a stat that exemplifies how physical the Devils have been this season. When looking at which NHL team has the most hits per game, number one are the Panthers. They average about 29.83 hits per game. But at number 10 are the Devils. They average 23.52 hits per game. I think adding players like Paul Cotter, Brendan Dillon, Stefan Nason have made the Devils a more physical team. I get it. People want to see the Devils, once again, emulate what the Panthers are, because when you have players like Matthew Tkachuk and Brad Marchand, they're really good players from a statistical standpoint, but don't let that fool you. They can handle themselves. We see Tkachuk, he takes no prisoners. Marchand, he takes no prisoners. He embraces sort of being like the villain. In fact, both the Tkachuk brothers do. So I definitely respect it from the Panthers, because, like I said, they got so much talent on that roster, and their star players know how to hold their own. And when you got great two-way players in Sasha Barkov, Sam Reinhart, Sam Bennett, it makes them even more dangerous, because you know that all those players can hold their own and be somewhat physical and not afraid to throw their body around. But the Devils got to work with what they're being given. And here's another stat that kind of exemplifies the problem that the Devils had, which is they got shut out way too many times this year. Which team got shut out the most this season? The Predators. They had 10. Tied for second, the Devils and Blue Jackets with 9. Luckily, the Devils were a playoff team, because right below the Devils and Blue Jackets, you had the Flyers, you had the Islanders. Geez, the Metro, once again, is very weak. But digressing a little bit, it goes to show you the Devils had problems sometimes generating offense. And outside of their top 6, who else was going to produce points? That was the main question mark all season long. In fact, that was a point of emphasis going into the trade deadline. Could Fitzgerald aim for somebody else? He tried to, but he came in second. And then during his exit interview, he said a, I guess, controversial statement saying, like, what is depth scoring? Look, the Devils have a lot of work to do. They're a good team, but they still got a decent amount of flaws that they got to address. And one player is not going to like take them to the promised land. It's going to be a collective team effort. Teams will always beat individuals. I said it in a recent episode. Let's look at this year's Stanley Cup Finals matchup. You got the Panthers, you got the Oilers, but we don't even have to look at this year. Let's look to last season. You could say that Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl were by far the better players in that series. In fact, McDavid won MVP despite being on the losing team, the first to do so since 2003, but we don't really talk about that all that much. Brodeur got robbed, but not going on that tangent. How did the Panthers beat the two best players in the series, or I guess two of the best players in the league? Collectively, they were a better team, better forward group, better blue liners, better goaltending. They have a great coach in Paul Maurice. I'm probably going to say it again, but the Panthers are definitely the prime example, and they're building a dynasty if you don't consider them one already. So I think that's what the Devils need to strive for a little bit, which is it's not just going to be one player. So let's go back to the 2022-2023 season. People were saying that the Devils were a little too soft. So what did Fitzgerald do? He added players like Timo Meier. That was a blockbuster deal. Then he added someone like Curtis Lazar. Lazar does faceoffs. He works the corner. If you're a Devils fan and you've been watching him the past few seasons, obviously this year wasn't Lazar's best, but he was dealing with injury. So that doesn't really represent what Lazar has brought to the team. Then the very next year, people were complaining about the goaltending, but Fitzgerald didn't address it. He just said, we're going to run it back with Vanacek and Schmidt. And boy, that was a big mistake. The Devils added Toffoli, and their offense, really good. I would say one of the best in the NHL. Then they dealt with injuries. Then it all sort of went south. The Devils weren't consistent. They parted ways with Lindy Ruff midseason. Travis Green took over, but not really much changed. And Travis Green is a good coach. He led the Senators to the playoffs for the first time since 2017, nearly 10 years. Then what happened this past year? You got Markstrom. You're going back with Allen as a backup this time around. Then you add more physicality, yet the Devils were still a fringe playoff team. They got handled in 5 games by the Hurricanes, albeit they were dealing with injury and they were completely gutted. But when the Devils were healthy after the Christmas break, they went back to their inconsistent ways, which showed me they still got some other flaws to address. And I think it starts with scoring because they got shut out one too many times. Their physicality definitely picked up, at least from my perspective. So I think physicality and scoring, it goes hand in hand. Good example would be the Panthers. But I think the bigger issue that the Devils need to address is their scoring, because their offense took a couple steps backwards. Their defense steps forward. Their physicality steps forward. Their goaltending, giant leaps forward, thanks to Jacob Markstrom. So when people are complaining about Rossi's size, I'm like, okay, yeah, he doesn't play small. He plays with a chip on his shoulder. That's what I like to see. And he provides scoring, which is something the Devils need because their bottom 6 didn't contribute all that much. So that's where I stand with the whole debate, physicality or scoring. I think you can never have too much of either, but it's not just a one fixed solution for the Devils. They need to add more assets to the roster to really go over the edge. But Markstrom's getting older. Consider that. He sure has 2 years remaining before he becomes a UFA. the Devils window is not forever. That's all I just got to say. But let me know your thoughts. Do you want to see the Devils pursue Marco Rossi? Why or why not? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X Page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X Page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.